so we covered how many thousand years in just over an hour. And we went from Uphill and Worldbury encampment right the way up to the village of Weston. So today I'm going to concentrate on Weston beginning to change, beginning to become a place of tourism before the railway. And then when the railway comes, it'll be 9 o'clock. No, it won't, it'll be 8:30. and you'll have to wait until the following week then. So, but I shall put a bit in about the railway, but that's okay. Right then, let's...
The bottom part of it should.
yes, right, okay. So, we've got the thing in, have we? Yep.
Yes, it's all
Okay, so here we are in the £3 million.
Yeah.
You see, I've got the pictures arranged just to coordinate with the Mercury. So we're going to look. I call this the meeting of kings because the old boy who lived in the village. This is Farmer King and Isambard Kingdom Brunel. So this covers the period we're going to look at. Are we recording this?
We are, yes.
Yes, so if anyone wants to have a recording of the pictures, you'll be able to get it from whatever you say on YouTube. And
Yes, I'll email it now. And,
okay, so
finish.
all the pictures. So Weston begins to embrace a completely different world. It's always traditionally, it still is a tradition, that a lot of people in Weston embrace modernity with some hesitation. So I put it like that. But Weston moved gradually from being a very inconsequential West Country village to quite a fashionable seaside resort before the railway arrived. When the railway arrived, it changed the whole quality. It brought what was referred to as the Bedminster riff-raff. So, I'm quoting, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute. And that begins tourism. So the village moves into being a town, and the cut-off point is going to be 1842, when Weston becomes officially a town. So, let's just recap on what was here. If you had come into the village, at the upper end of the village, both socially and architecturally, and the north end directionally, we've got the establishment, the parsonage, which is now Glebe House, but was then the rectory on the left there. And this thing doesn't work, does it? This is Glebe House as it is now, and it's now flats. So I think about 7 flats in there. And then across the Grove, the little Grove cottage, which was built by the Smith Pigots as their summer retreat. Gradually it was extended, and in the end it became their principal residence. And this is how it was in its heyday, when Grove Park was the front garden to the house, the entire hill was the back garden, and you could walk from Weston to Bristol without ever leaving the Smith Pigott land. Funny old family, but this is the house. Photograph of it, just before Hitler dropped something on it he shouldn't have done, and there's very little of it left now, other than this bit, which serves as the mayor's parlour. It became a municipal park, municipal property, at the end of the 19th century, when the Smith Pigot's estate collapsed, and they all went quite bonkers. Other properties in the village, they tended to be tiled, local tile, or thatched. Of which, of course, there's only one thatched cottage left in Weston and another one in Worl. And this is the thatched cottage built in the 18th century for the Reverend Mr. Leaves, who was the rector of Rington. Didn't particularly want to spend his time curing the souls of the parishioners in Rington, so paid a curate to do the job. And meanwhile, he came to Weston, built himself a cottage in which he could sit and compose music and ballads, because that was his real passion. And that building is still with us. That's what it became, though probably none of us will remember it as the White Cross Dairy. I certainly don't, and I'm older than all of you, so that's... but there we've got the date. I do wish architects and builders and developers would carry on this this tradition of putting the date on the building. When you make it really does help, and it also stops people arguing and saying, no, I know, and there it is. So we know the thatched cottage is there in 1774. Though I'm sure when it was built, it wasn't called the old thatched cottage. It was the thatched cottage. And the map of Weston in 1810, it's a very useful map because it shows exactly what Weston was about. If I don't expect you to read the names, but let me just point out, obviously the yellow bit is the sand, called the Strand. Very grand, it was the Strand. This road here is the road to Bristol, which is still the Bristol Road, the Upper Bristol Road, Lower Bristol Road, coming to this point, which would be today's YMCA, down the street, which is High Street, to Big Lamp Corner as it became, with a little branch going off to the front, and that was Watersill Road, is now Regent Street, and Watersill Road carrying on here, which has later morphed into Locking Road. And this place, Wallclose Corner, is where you would find today's Odeon. So onto that map I've superimposed in red the buildings we would see today. Where the Odeon is, Orchard Street, Meadow Street, the Boulevard, these were simply field boundaries rather than actual roads. But in a little more detail, coming down the street, it was called the street because it was the only street. So people said, oh, go down the street. All high streets were the streets, they just had other names. Two ends of it. West Lane went to the sea. We still have West Lane, but we now call it West Street. And at the southern end, as I say, Watersill Road, which is now Regent Street. This is an interesting area, of course. This is today's Big Lamp Corner, where the Carrot is. And one track is just going off there, you can see here, along to the Meadow Street, and then branching into the Orchard. And that road would be Orchard Street. So there we've got Meadow Street, Orchard Street. And here is the old Weston farmhouse. Here. Now that today would be Orchard Place, and that is where the Carrot is. Right there in the middle. That was the village green. That's where the gossips of the village were reputed to hang out and natter and put the world to right. So in a way, the modern Big Lamp Corner is just the same. It's a meeting place of streets where people can hang out and just natter or do a bit of shopping or moan. It was always thus. And in what is today Orchard Place stood the old farmhouse, Mr. King's farmhouse. So Orchard Place today, there, is where King's farmhouse stood. And again, I'm not sure when it became known as the old farmhouse, because presumably at some point it wasn't the old farmhouse, at some point it was the new farmhouse. But these are rather typical of the buildings you would have found in Weston. Built, of course, of local materials. There was no other way of getting materials here before the railway came, so you had to use the local stone, local thatch, local reeds. You could get some stuff across from Wales by boat, but certainly there was no way of getting other building material into Weston. Now, tourism, a lot of people are under the misapprehension that tourism started when the railway came. Well, it certainly had a great boost. But people were coming here way before the railway arrived. They came by stagecoach. And so if you came to a place like Weston by stagecoach, ipso facto, you were quite wealthy. You were the only sort of people who could afford to come from London or Bath or whatever to Weston. And there's a very interesting book that was published, written rather, by Charlotte Wilson of her visit here in 1826, 15 years before the railway arrives, and this is a copy of the actual book. It was published in 1882 by local man Baker, but it's a fairly accurate transcription of what she thought of Weston. I couldn't help but put a few things on the screen. I'm loath to read from PowerPoint, because of death by PowerPoint, but these are the people who were there. These are the illustrations in the book. Old Farmer King and Hannah, his niece, and the farmer's wife, and this be Tim, the labourer and manservant. So, I don't expect you to I'll read this out. This is a quote from it, which I think is worth reading. In the year 1826, I visited Bath for the benefit of the waters. God, we've all done that, haven't we, once, and you never do it again. It takes that awful sulphur stuff. Quite, I mean, you're a doctor, tell me how it's meant to do you any good at all. I've no idea. But anyway.
Life afterwards is better than it was while you were doing it.
That's it. It's all in the mind, isn't it? Anyhow, I visited Bath for the benefit of the waters. After a sojournment of 4 months there, so obviously a bit of money, and my medical advisor recommended me to spend a few weeks at Weston-super-Mare. The village then, for it has since become a place of fashionable resort, consisted of only 4 streets, 2 inns and a few scattered houses, some of which had been newly built by the rustic inhabitants of Weston, who themselves resided in small cottages with mould or stone floors. On our arrival there, myself and, it shouldn't say other, it should say myself and mother, I've left the M out, the place was full, not a lodging to let. We were encumbered with luggage, and the stage would not before tomorrow return to Bath. Our situation was truly perplexing. The day, too, was intensely hot, which rendered our wanderings over the deep burning sand on the beach very like wanderings in the land of Egypt. Yeah. This person can come and work for the tourist authority. At last, a young woman belonging to a small cottage, compassionating our case, very kindly took us to an old dame, who was, I presume, principal gossip of the place. She was holding a cabinet with 4 other gossips when we were ushered into her presence. Our tale was told, and we, like strange animals, were stared at by the whole group. We soon made treaty for a whitewashed room in Mr. King's farm, with a little casement window considerably lower than my head, and a door secured only by a wooden button. I must not omit to say that our landlord had another house on the beach to furnish, which for the summer season the old farm had been stripped of a great part of its furniture and most of its kitchen utensils. At first I found some difficulty in understanding the broad Somersetshire dialect of the good folks at the farm, and they at times were as much puzzled to comprehend me. I had never before been 40 miles from London. Consequently, the art of making butter and cheese was to me very interesting. I was delighted with the novelty of the scene, and even attempted, in an ambitious, rusticating mood, to milk a cow. But Collie cast, I thought, an ungracious glance at me, so I resigned my seat at the pail to the farmer's niece Hannah, who was her regular attender. I was pleased and amused at the simplicity of the honest rustics, to make myself acquainted with whose occupation and manners I often left my own apartment to join the old dame in the cheese room or parlour. And this is all in Orchard Place in 1826. So what's happening in Weston? Around about 1800, it doesn't need to be precise because it isn't, Weston is engaged in these activities. It's a farming settlement, and the things we farm here: cattle, sheep, beef, fowl, vegetables, and of course all the things we still grow: apples, cider, blackberries, watercress, samphire. I still gather samphire at the mouth of the River Axe. You can get it by the carrier bag full. You can take it to smart restaurants and earn a pretty penny by selling samphire. And goose feathers, that was another thing. The goose feathers were taken to Bristol to stuff our mattresses and our pillows. So farming was very important. Fishing was also important, and the fish then: salmon, cod, sprat, eel, flounder, shrimp, dab, skate. All of these were at one point people got fed up eating fresh salmon. God, not another salmon. So I don't think people in Weston starved, because there was food aplenty. We also developed some other industries. The teasel industry, it was a short-lived one, but it was for getting the teasels to card in the woolen industry and we would send the teasels off to the mills in Gloucestershire, and some even went as far as Yorkshire. But it wasn't a very long-lived form of farming. Seaweed was gathered to be sent up to Bristol for the glass industry to make potash. And then there were other minor industries. Mining itself on Milton Hill had been going on certainly since the days of Henry VIII, and that lasted right up until the 1920s. Lead mining, calamine mining. Herb gathering, that had been a small industry, but nevertheless people were doing it. And of course the last one, which was by no means an official occupation, that of smuggling. That had always been part of living at the coast. And when we don't think of all the lower orders doing the smuggling, everyone was in on it, including the rector and the squire. It was all sort of a wink and a nod and beating the system. A bit like those days when I was a student, the idea you could smuggle an extra bottle of wine through, you've beaten the system. That's what it was all about. And interestingly, certainly with getting stuff up to Bristol, it would have been transported both by cart and by sea. As I said last week, the fishing industry at Anchor's Head was quite substantial at one point, certainly in the reign of Elizabeth I. But how did they get the fish up to Bristol? They wouldn't have taken it by land, they probably took it by boat. Where the boats would have gone from, I don't know, there's just nothing to indicate. So this is Weston, around about 1800, where the population is only around about 100, something like 35 families. So because Weston isn't on the route to anywhere else, I said last week, it's at the end of the road, it was even at the end of the road, and it's still at the end of the road. You don't come through Weston to go anywhere else. You only come to Weston because you want to come to Weston. So it's not like going through some nice place where you think, oh, this is interesting, we'll just stop off here for an hour. You've got to make the point of coming. So Weston is a bit off the beaten track. The farmers, of course, needed their own way of grinding corn, so naturally the windmills. There were a number of mills here. Whirl Mill, rebuilt in 1765. That's the one on top of the hill, still there, the observatory. That's the one on the left and in the middle. Then Weston Mill, which was above Weston Tone Quarry. That's the top of Queen's Road. That was derelict by the 1770s, so there's not a trace of that to be found anywhere. Uphill Mill was derelict. That's Uphill Mill on the right, derelict in 1792. It's since been restored as an observation tower. And then there was the Moor Lane Mill, which in the 1980s, 1990s was redeveloped, and you can just see the round bit of it as part of somebody's house. And this is the mill at Whirl, rather romanticised picture of it, but I think that's meant to be Crooks Peak in the distance. So, the M has slipped, hasn't it? Yes. Tourism. This changes the whole outlook of Weston. Suddenly, there's the wherewithal to make money from another source, and those with an entrepreneurial spirit quickly understand this. So from about 1780 onwards, we begin to see the development of home tourism. We traditionally had problems with the French. They were always causing us problems. Every so often we were going to war with the French, which meant wealthy people couldn't go abroad on their usual grand tours. It was all very annoying, and so they would have to develop amusements at home, going around various new places in England. So every time there's a bit of a debacle with the French, it did our home tourist industry a power of good. It's like every time a bomb goes off in somewhere like Tunisia, our hoteliers don't worry two hoots because it means more. It was always like that. You just carry on. So the early tourism in Weston, it brought all sorts of people. They weren't people who were coming to lounge on the beach or to or to frolic or to go on piers or kiss me quick. No, it was much more genteel. And you get all these sorts of people coming into Weston: botanists, geologists, painters, philosophers, archaeologists, historians, writers, musicians, clergymen, healers. They're not just coming to sit down for a fortnight and do nothing. They're coming here to do something, to be inspired. And it, part of the development of the Romantic era, when people were going to be inspired by the open countryside, by the sea, by the sunsets. And of course, you had to go to places to get the inspiration. There was no other form of communication. I mean, nowadays you can sit at home in front of a thing that size and never see another human being. You can get everything from the net. And on the left, I mentioned earlier about herb collecting. In the reign of Charles II, Weston was actually providing herbs. And there's a quote there, because they came on the rocks near Weston-super-Mare. Parkinson, who was the king's apothecary. So here was Weston providing herbal remedies. Well, whether they worked or not, I have no idea. One thing we also developed was the idea of curative spring waters. Rather like Bath, we had our supplies. They're no longer there. Grove House in Grove Park, there was fresh spring water. I mean, when you think of it, why else would the squire want to build his house there if he didn't have a water supply? It's not like nowadays you just get Bristol Water or Wessex and pump it in. And so, but I've no idea where in Grove Park. I mean, it's just not there now. Devonshire Cottage, which is on it's where the place that became the Cairo Hotel, which itself became the what was the name of it? Burnt down. Anyhow, it's at the junction of Highbury Hill and the seafront. No, it'll come to me. Anyhow, that's there was a spring in there, and that spring, people tell me, is still there. And then the place we called Spring Cove, which was known as Dripping Well Cave, because that's where water came. And that's where we think the Iron Age people living on Worldbury Encampment got their fresh water supply from. So we had these places of fresh water. Now, we developed this idea that spring water was curative, that it had religious connotations. And when you think of it, the sort of water people were drinking was pretty awful. They wouldn't have known why it was awful. And therefore, if you drank spring water, it was fresh and it wasn't going to do any harm. And so you thought, oh, I'm better as a result of drinking that. Well, of course you are, because you're drinking foul water. So it was very good. So Weston had its moments of curative waters. And again, you think of it like Bristol. They had an attempt fairly recently to reopen the Jacob's Well water supply and sell it off in Bristol blue glass at some extraordinary price. And people are easily duped, aren't they? They go to Tesco and buy Tesco bottled water, which is actually tap water. It has nothing in it other than 100% tap water. And they sell it, and people buy it. Unbelievable. But then the idea came around that actually going into the sea water itself, into the salt water, would be good for you. And we all know the story of George III going off to Brighton and George III going off to Weymouth. And the moment the king did something, then it became fashion. It still is. You have to get a young prince or princess do something and everybody else copies it. We all like to say we don't, but actually, if we didn't, the advertising industry wouldn't work. It clearly does work. And here's a wonderful print of George III going to Weymouth in 1789 with a bathing machine. The idea that men and women should be in separate... I mean, in Weston, when we had the bathing machines, no man could bathe within 200 yards of a woman because it might excite him too much, and therefore, so they had to keep poles apart. where here there's this wonderful, I do love these Georgian cartoons. It's sort of private eye of the 18th century. And here's the king, minus his wig, of course, being helped into the water by all these women. Now the town band also had to accompany the king, so they had to go into the water in order to play the national anthem when the king came down from. Can you imagine? It's absolutely wonderful. But of course, this became fashionable. Weymouth, it took off. That's where the king went. Brighton took off, and all the other places. Weston had one royal visit when the young Prince of Wales came to stay at Reeves Hotel for one night, after which they renamed it the Royal Hotel as well. And here in Weston we had our bathing machines, and this is a rather nice postcard of the bathing machines. But they were all wrecked in the Great Storm of 1903. Every single one was destroyed, and Weston, being a very forward-looking place, never put any more back. People getting undressed on the beach, they didn't care anymore about bathing machines. And that same storm shattered the causeway to Knightstone Island, and one man drowned there. So, but that's beside the point. Now, we all know that one of the problems Weston faces in terms of selling itself is our water. We try to get around it someday. We've all seen those postcards which have been touched up with blue paint, haven't they? And they've gone too far over the sand, so some of the sand is blue as well. But heck, we all know. We have a tide which is estuarial, so it's mud, and we have a tide which goes out a long way. The only problem is the trippers who come here, they come at the wrong time of the day. I keep saying it comes in twice a day, every day. What's your problem? Just look at the tide table. It comes in at 4 o'clock in the morning. Come here at 4 o'clock in the morning. And of course, we have the second highest tide in the world after the Bay of Fundy in Canada. This is part of what Weston is. We can't get away from it. It's 42 feet maximum difference between high water and low water. That's a hell of a tidal range. But of course, it leaves us with these wonderful mud flats, which people in the past have claimed to have curative elements to them, because the breezes blow across the mud, the ozone rises into the mud, we breathe it in, and it's good for us. And it's also very calming. And we all know people in Weston. Present a Westonian with a problem, and we'll do it tomorrow. It's manana. We all go to sleep. We don't care. We don't worry. It's the ozone. It's the ozone. We are naturally dozy, and we live long as a result of it. So we need to mark it. We need to market the mud and the lethargy. And the tide. Well, it's again those silly tourists who they park on the beach, come back half a day later. Where's my car? And when the boats came in from Wales with the coal, they simply rested on the mud at Knightstone and waited till the tide came back in and went out again. But of course, the tide was used, the sea was used by those entrepreneurs who realised they could induce people into the water for the benefit of their health. And here's Anchor Head, 1817. This is a wonderful painting. It's in the museum, and the ladies, of course it is Mrs. Mugridge. She had her bathing establishment down there, and the women would get changed up a little tower by the Claremont Hotel, go down to Anchor Head, and they would immerse themselves in the water or just sort of jump around. They didn't really swim. They weren't into swim. Well, because they were wearing such awful things made of wool. And I mean, could you imagine a great canopy of wool around you? You go in the water, but just being in the water was said to be good. Well, it is, isn't it? So the seagulls are agreeing. And it's always been the point of art as well. And I can never resist using this in the college, because It's dear Warren Story's painting of Anchor Head. Warren was head of the School of Art here at Weston College. Many people will remember. Great artist, great artist. And we invented all sorts of ways of avoiding the wind. I mean the blowing wind rather than the medical wind. These are wonderful. If only we had these today. That's at Glentworth Bay, which is now of course Marine League. Smuggling was always part of the Western tradition, and fishing, and you can see up on the top left there the fishing poles or the stalls, which are still used at Burnbeck. But there's no commercial fishing in Weston. I'm told that in order to sell fish which you catch, you have to get so many different permissions that nobody can do it. So it's such a pity, because if you know a fisherman, the cod from the bay is really, really good. It's thick white meat, but you can't buy it anywhere. But local people still do it. This boat in the museum, it's the last of the Western Flatners. This was Juicy Payne's boat. Flatners because the bottoms were flat because of the tides. You couldn't have a boat with a very deep keel because it would flop over, or you couldn't get out. And this is the last of the Western Flatners. The other two properties, the York Hotel and the Coast Guard cottages are uphill. I put there because, again, that's part of the Western industry of smuggling. And the Coast Guard cottages are what they are. This is where His Majesty's Coast Guards resided, and it was their job to get on their donkeys and wander along the beach and see if any ships were bringing in things they shouldn't have done. And there are many, many stories of this happening. One wonderful story when a French lugger came in, dropped anchor at night time in Uphill Bay. They threw the kegs of brandy overboard with little buoy markers on them, ready for the uphill villagers to come and collect them. Then upped anchor, put the sails up, and nothing happened. The skipper had forgotten that the Bristol Channel tides were really rather difficult, and the following morning the Coast Guard came out, and there was this French ship marooned on the mud, surrounded by kegs of brandy. And there's absolutely no record of what happened to those brandy. I think probably the local officers were in on it as well. And the York Hotel, in the days when the sand dunes came all the way up from Uphill to Weston, before the hotel was built, before Weston had a promenade, there was another incident, and kegs of brandy were stored there and pushed into the sand dunes right in front of what is now the York Hotel. And there's a lovely tale of one man rolling this great keg of brandy round to the yard of the Britannia Inn, and all the local people came with buckets and things. So everyone had their fair share. And then the man who'd found it, he said, well, I'm not going to leave the keg, that's good firewood, I'll take that home. Cut it all up, put it on his fire, and he lost the roof because the brandy infused wood it rather went up very well, so he lost his thatch. He had a good drink, a good fire, but had to rebuild his roof. And these posters will appear everywhere. I mean, in Weston, at Flagstaff Hill, which is now Prince Consort Gardens, the flag would be hoisted to summon the Navy cutter, and the Navy cutter would fly, it would fly a red pennant at the top to say it was in pursuit, and the ship would have to heave to if the cutter. But can you imagine, somebody spots a boat in the channel with possible contraband, so you run all the way up to Flagstaff Hill, hoist a flag in the hope that a Navy boat somewhere out in the sea will. So it's a hopeless task, hopeless. But let's go back to the tourists who come. The 1780 edition of Felix Farley's Bristol Journal, that's not the 1780 edition, but that's the only one I could find. But the 1780 edition has this advert in. For health and sea bathing at Uphill, Jane Bisson's son most respectfully informed the public that they have fitted up 2 commodious houses for the reception of families or single persons, during the summer at reasonable terms. So here we are, 1780. Railway doesn't come until 1840, 41. And here, William Shepherd, who ran the Ship Inn at Uphill, he's advertising elegant bathing machine available for company during the season. Not quite sure what that... does he want company in the bathing machine or what? But anyhow. But then, and in 1826, they even opened something called a sea bathing infirmary. So again, the idea that the water's going to do you good, opened it Uphill, affording relief to diseased objects of charity. I mean, that's a wonderful terminology, diseased objects of charity. But that didn't work, but nobody went to it. And Weston was taking over. It's interesting that at this time, Uphill was the place where you went for your recuperation, not Weston. Weston hadn't yet eclipsed Uphill. In 1804, George Bennett, a very well-known solicitor out at Banwell, he refers to Weston. This village is much frequented of late in the summer and autumn for the benefit of sea air and bathing. Several good lodging houses have been lately erected for the reception of company. So again, more evidence that Weston is beginning to change. In 1802, though, I was sort of TripAdvisor, they were so badly off for provisions that frequently they were obliged to eat bread which was completely turned mouldy, and their substitute for butter was generally liquefied bacon fat. Well, you're not going back to that place in too much of a hurry, are you? And here I've got it's a printout of the 1822 guide, the Guide to Weston-super-Mare, Somersetshire, which is addressed to the inhabitants of Bristol, Bath and their vicinities. I'll just read you just a couple of bits, but it's fascinating. Weston-super-Mare, remember 1822. Weston-super-Mare, now a fashionable summer retreat, and by the last census taken in May 1821, containing 735 souls, consisted not many years ago of only a few huts, whose inhabitants gained their subsistence by fishing. But the purity of its air, added to its vicinity to Bath and Bristol, attracted the attention of valetudinarians. And the cures, continually affected by the uncommon salubrity of its invigorating breezes, soon raised it to the station it now occupies amongst fashionable watering places. And it goes on, the airs are uncontaminated by passing over any land that can rob them of their peculiar salubrity. The air is soft but bracing, and it is peculiarly efficacious to those constitutions with which the Devonshire coast disagrees. Isn't it wonderful you can say that Devon's no good for you, but Somerset is. Though it's so balmy that even when blowing a hurricane, it imparts strength to the invalid. And so these things go on. So, what's beginning to happen? There's a new order taking place. We get some new people coming in, not the squirearchy, but ordinary people with a bit of nous. They can do things, but they're not part of the establishment. People like Richard Parsley, John Cox, James Capile, and Richard Fry. They get together to force through the enclosure war. This is the time when Parliament is allowing land to be enclosed. From the old medieval strip field system, people are being able to assemble land and then enclose it with hedges and develop it or farm it in a new way. So they apply to Parliament for an enclosure award, which is granted and becomes operative in 1815. Parsley and Cox then have to get rid of people who have got ancient rights, the Oster tenements, the people who have the right to live in what is now beach lawns, but was then the sand dunes, and they would build their huts out of wood that came in from shipwrecks. But they had the right in law to be there. They could not be moved. It's a bit like common land and public rights of way, or these wonderful English things that you can't be budged. But Parliament was going to change all of that, and so they were bought out, and the land was gradually enclosed. But it wasn't just a case of handing over to people the land and saying, okay, you can get on with it. It came at a price. You had to enclose the land with walls or hedges, and the walls would be specified in terms of height and design. Bridges had to be built across reams and rivers. Sedge had to be planted on the dunes to stop the sand blowing. And common quarries had to be opened so people could go and win stone without having to pay to do it. It brought in the land consolidation, and it brought in the entrepreneurial spirit and, of course, speculation. And as I said earlier, the various conflicts of the French, and particularly the end of the Napoleonic War, 1815, all sorts of other things happened, things like depression, poor harvests. This had a great effect on the economy of the area. But gradually we begin to see the hotels being built, the boarding houses, and we see a different sort of pride beginning to develop. It's a middle class pride, rather than the aristocracy and the squirearchy running the show and everybody else just doffing their caps and doing what they're told. This rising merchant class begins to feel important. This is our place, we want to have a say in the running of it. We're not going to allow the squire to carry on doing what he always did. And so you begin to see a change which results in Parliament passing the Great Reform Act of 1832, which changes the whole voting system, allowing ordinary people to start voting, men to start with. And in 1832, women of property could vote as well. It didn't all come about as a result of the suffragette movement, but there had to be women of property. It was a very important act, the 1832 Act. So all of this is part of a new order that's happening, not just in Weston, but everywhere. And this is the enclosure award map that's granted. I won't actually read that, I repaginated it all, but just to show you something in detail. This is Watershill Road, which today is Regent Street to then, the rest of it is Locking Road. This is Ashcombe Road. These roads were laid out as part of the award. And what today would be the entrance to the old cemetery, the road turns here along Milton Road to what was then the Ashcombe Gate. So that was the end of it. This today, there's a little quarry there. So that would be Manor Road today, going up to Ashcombe Hill Gate. And a road was planned called the Qstoke Road. It got past two small, what have I done? I knew I shouldn't top the screen. Two small quarries there. And that today, if you go at the top of Manor Road and you go straight across, there's a lane going up which is called Wood Lane. Yeah. So that was going to be the Qstoke Road up to the top where it would meet other roads, Pickwinard Road, that would go along to Will, and down on the other side to Qstoke. They, of course, are just tracks now. They never developed into roads, but these certainly developed into roads. And here, Quarry Road, that today is Queen's Road, Jenkins Way, that's Cecil Road, and the Blackrock Path, the toll road, leading out to Birnbach Road to Birnbeck. So all of these roads were laid out with bridges, with gates, because nobody was responsible for roads. It had to be as a result of, you've got the land, therefore you will hedge it, you will wall it, you will build the bridges, you will create the ditches, you will open up the roads. So here's Weston then beginning to change physically. And here's a wonderful picture. This is Quarry Road. This is today's Queen's Road. Neither of those buildings exist, of course, anymore. And the town quarry, or the parish quarry, up at the top, which carried on in use up until 1950, 54. And it's now the Old Town Quarry where the Civic Society is. Now the establishment was still in the hands of the Smith Pigots. John Pigot, the Francophile, he was succeeded by his brother, Wadham Pigot. Wadham Pigot, whose name, of course, is immortalised in Wadham Street. he was the rector of Weston, and whilst his brother was away in France all the time, he was sort of running the family estates, and had a great influence on Weston. Unfortunately, there was a lot of interbreeding, and they were a bit balmy. I mean, John Hugh Smith Pigott, he became Lord of the Manor in 1823, but he was the bastard son of the Smiths. His wife was the bastard daughter of the Pigott, and it was all. And they were utterly bonkers, completely potty, wonderfully so. I mean, just look at his eyes. Would you trust that? And to make matters worse, he became a Roman Catholic. Today, so what? But to become Roman Catholic then was tantamount to being rather supportive of the French and revolutions, and a bit. It was a bit no. Think of Ulster 10 years ago, with the divisions there. Think of the differences in Islam today between the two main branches, and that's how people thought then. So they weren't particularly well liked by the locals. Their power, as I said, was on the wane, but they weren't going down quietly. Here they were. I mean, here they are at Grove House. This is sometime into the later 19th century, in the middle of Grove Park, with the dogs, the hounds, and they're going hunting, and they took the horses down High Street and out into the countryside. Tally-ho! People had to scatter, but they got muddled up with all sorts of things, including some very dubious magic circles, and then the Reverend Mr. Smith Pigott became the notorious leader of the Agapemonites at Spaxton, which caused Parliament to pass the Clergy Disciplinary Act. So for the first time, an Anglican clergyman could be unfrocked for conduct unbecoming, and his conduct was certainly unbecoming, but that's a different story. And there's St. Joseph's, the Roman Catholic Church, which they founded. They had to put it right up on the hill, out of the way of Weston, because Weston was very, very Protestant and didn't know. And even the magistrate encouraged the lads in Weston to go up to the Catholic Church and throw stones through the window because they were Catholics, and we didn't want those. And when the bishop came to bless it, he was advised by the local constabulary to wear mufti. Don't come dressed as a Roman bishop, because we can't guarantee your safety. So different days. And here's the last of well, not the last, but old Cecil Smith Pigott. Poor thing. When he was a little boy, he was made to use that trowel, which is in the Mayor's Parlour, to lay the foundation stone for Burnbeck Pier, because the locals didn't want his dad, who was the Lord of the Manor, doing it. They so hated him. So little Smith Pigott, who was only 7, I think, had to go and do it and make a speech. And then when he died, there was a fund set up for the Pigott Memorial, which was going to be opposite the thatched cottage. And this was put out to public subscription, and it raised precisely 0. Nobody put a penny into the fund, so it was never built. So, how do we actually accommodate the tourists? Well, you've seen from the old farmhouse, but here's our first purpose-built hotel. Because it was the only hotel, it was simply called the hotel. Then it was owned by Mr. Rogers, it became Rogers Hotel, then Reeves Hotel, and then as I said, when the Prince of Wales stayed one night, it suddenly became the Royal Hotel. 1807, on the site of an old farmhouse that had been burned down, this was built. And this is the front of it. What we now see as the front was a much later extension, because in those days, if you looked at the seaside, you built your properties on a north-south trajectory. You didn't build your property facing the sea, because the quality of windows was so poor, you wouldn't want the drafts coming in. So you did it the other way around. Or you built with a cat slide, so you had 3 floors that way, roof down there to 1 floor there, so the wind could come up like that. But this is the front of the original hotel. So that was the way in, and this is where the carriages would come up and deposit the tourists. And there you can see a group coming in. So just over there, That's the front of the hotel. The Great Reform Act. Weston was very much in favour of the Great Reform Act, and one of the characters here, Richard Parsley, one of those entrepreneurial developers, he built a pigsty. It's a wonderful thing. He built it to commemorate the Great Reform Act, and in it, on it rather, there was a plaque with a statement. This pigsty at Weston was built for two ends: to honour reform and give shelter to friends, whilst the mitre above, that's the power of the church, whilst the mitre above doth triumphantly show, the church stands secure, spite of grunters below. It's unfortunately it was taken down. It's now on the site numbers 2 and 3 Edinburgh Park North. It was taken down 18. I mean, it wasn't built to last. It was just a bit of a jokery. But that appeared in the Bristol Times and Mirror in 1832. And Parsley, he was very, very, very influential and important new developer in Weston. And this was his house, White Cross House, which is still there. It's tucked behind the wall of Victoria Methodist Church, and it's the current church hall. And that's his Georgian house, and it's a very handsome house indeed. That's it. But of course it's tucked way behind the church. That was the White Cross estate, right way down to what is now the railway station. That's where the Parsley family lived. Then of course the establishment. Parsley was having a bit of a go at the establishment, particularly the Bishop of Bath and Wells, whose son was the rector of Weston, the Law family. And the Laws were a wealthy family. This is his coat of arms in the east window at St John's Church. This is Law, after whom Ellenborough Crescent is named, because the Law family were the Ellenboroughs. Lord Ellenborough was the governor, Viceroy of India, and his brother was the Bishop of Bath and Wells, and his son was the rector of Weston. So they were very much of the upper class end of Weston. And the church in Weston, well, the village church, unlike Uphill, when they needed a new parish church, they left the old one and built a new one. In Weston, Wadham Piggott gave enough money to have Weston's medieval church completely removed. So today, to get some idea of this, think of that wall as being Lower Church Road. Think of that as being Grove Park. Think of that as being the present St John's Church, the parish church. But it was completely removed, and all that's left of it is a bit of that preaching cross, the base of it, and a couple of those windows which were taken around the corner into South Terrace and put in somebody's house. So that's the church as it was, medieval church, totally destroyed, and that's what went on in its place. That's since changed because Hans Fowler Price built a south aisle somewhat later. But this is about, I suppose, probably 1860. Now the street, this is an interesting statement. But Samuel Norville, one of the old Weston families, born in 1800, he wrote down his memories of High Street. It's a rather lovely description. There was no High Street. It was called the street, and very narrow it was too. There was only just room for one putt or cart to pass down it at a time, so very narrow. On the east side, there was a ditch, and on the west, a hedge banked up with stones to keep the earth back. The street itself was always very muddy and dirty. Some stones were thrown down loosely on one side to make a sort of footpath. Midway, there was a withy bed in which refuse fish were generally thrown. So all the heads and the guts, you chuck them in where Poundland is now. That's where they were all chucked. Nearly everyone kept geese. They paid so well. You see, they could run about over the common all day, and so it didn't cost much to keep. The feathers were plucked off the live birds once a year and taken to Bristol and other towns to sell. So when you wander down High Street, you just think of it as it was. And these are some old pictures of the street, 1815, and this one 1840. And the post office, Mrs. Sawtle kept a rather grand-sounding house in Clarence House in Regent Street. There's a sketch I made of it, but it's of course nothing exists now, and very few people use the post. It was so expensive. We talk about penny blacks and so on nowadays, but for the average person, you just didn't write a letter because it spending several pounds just to send a message. But this is where the post office, and the lad came twice a week with a donkey. He went out to Cross, which is where the stagecoach on the A38 went, and picked up the Western Mail and brought it back by donkey to Western to Mrs. Sawtle to sort out. Of course, all that changed when the railway came. But suddenly, you could send post all around the country very cheaply, very efficiently. And some of these sorts of houses began to develop. These are wealthy people. Fairlawn House in West Street. Now look very carefully. This is the only print I've got, so I've doctored it a bit. But if you're looking up, there's the tower of the church. That's Fairlawn House. On that exact site today is that. And if you still can't locate it, it's that. And that's Fairlawn Buildings, but nobody calls it that. It's, and meanwhile, where the hotel is, the field opposite was the hotel field. So where we are sitting today, this is the hotel field. And these are the buildings. On the left, you can see the original facade of the Royal Hotel. The next hotel, the Bath, which now is the Imperial. South Parade, still there. Waterloo House no longer exists. That was demolished to make way for Waterloo Street. And then High Street, which is still there. Veranda House, that was a lovely big mansion. That was taken down at the end of the 19th century for the new post office, which itself was then taken down for the Sovereign Centre. So the history is always changing life, isn't it? And this is a photograph of the hotel field before this building, before the Winter Garden. So this is looking out across towards the Royal Hotel there and Royal Terrace there. So the Cabot there. So there we have the field. And I think this was probably taken in 1926 when the field had been compulsorily purchased by the authority. And I suspect that's the sign going up saying for sale or has been sold or whatever. So there you see the hotel field, and then sweeping around, here it is again. That became Lloyd's Bank, that was the NatWest Bank. This is the High Street, obviously before the war, Lance and Lance, that's now the supermarket, Argos, yes. It became a supermarket, then Argos, High Street there. And that is the new post office. And cattle, and there's another sign. And this today, the Italian Gardens. So here's the view of our £3 million field, you see. And here's another, the Reverend John Skinner. A lot of archaeologists like coming to Weston, and he was a very well-known clergy in those days were often academics in spheres other than just theology. So a lot of the early scientists, a lot of the early philosophers, geologists, they were clergymen as well. So he came to Weston. Here's this lovely quote from him. Weston seems to be rapidly increasing, and as long as the whim lasts, it may answer to engage in the speculation of builders and Bristol doctors. But I think that the obstacles are so great to it becoming a permanent place that no one risk too much money in erecting houses for the company. Although Mr. Jacobs, I find, spent upwards of £5,000 in his marine villa built on the sand facing the muddy estuary, from whence he may contemplate its chestnut-coloured waves once, at least, in the day at high water. The remainder enjoy a wide expanse of dark slime. Well, Isaac Jacobs, his big house, which he built, Belvedere, where the bus station was then built and where that ghastly brick block called Carlton Mansions is. Sorry, does anyone live in it? No, hideous design. There we are. He was the person who owned the Bristol Glass Works, so he was very much engaged in Bristol blue glass manufacture, and so had links with Weston, with the seaweed and the potash, and saw Weston as the place to live, so built himself this great mansion. But there's the Reverend Mr. Skinner saying, silly man, spending 5,000 quid on a house just to look out at slime. But here, you know, things were happening. 1826, the first promenade is laid. There's a bit of a rough thing, Nightstone to the thatched cottage, but this is the only sketch we've got. But this is where it is. So already people are getting together. There's no council. People are getting together and saying we need to do something to attract more and more people into Weston. And the first assembly and reading rooms opened by Richard Hill, 1830. The building is still there. So look at the print. There's the church. There's the Royal Hotel. And the flagstaff is there. Hill in the background. You can see Nightstone here. And this is Richard Hill's reading room. And it is still there. That's what it became. Huntley's Hotel, still there, and that bit encased in red is the original reading room. Been there for 187 years. Now, the building today is most appallingly looked after. It's absolutely calling out, crying out for some decent renovation. But when you think, when people came to Weston, there was nothing to do other than walk and sit and rent horses or donkeys and go out for the day. And the gentlemen would assemble here in the reading room and read papers at probably a week late and play billiards. And that was the social centre then of early Weston for the visitors, if you were wealthy, if you were male. Sorry women, there was nothing for you to do. Stay at home, cook, or, you know, it's a different world, wasn't it? Then, of course, somebody got the idea that Nightstone Island itself could become part of the tourist attraction. And two men, Mr. Howe, who was a parasol maker from Bristol, and Mr. Taylor, who was a carpenter from Yatton, they got together and they bought Nightstone Island, which was an island. And on it, they built a house and a pool where people could go. There was an open air pool, you could swim there. And you could take the waters in the house. You could bathe, you could just enjoy yourself. But they didn't have, Mr. Atwell ran it for them. Not quite sure what this outfall is here, but anyhow, let's not ask too many questions. Then it was sold to the Reverend Thomas Pruin in 1824, and he rather improved the causeway, but the causeway, the island was still inaccessible at high tide, so you had to get a local fisherman to take you out there. A bit like, what's the island on the South Devon, where that wonderful Poirot Hotel, big bay.
Berg Island. Berg Island.
That's it, yes. And you have to go out on a big tractor thing when the tide's in. So this is what Nightstone Island was like. And of course the island was smaller than it is now. When the baths and the theatre were built in 1902, the island was physically extended to put those facilities on. So this is the original island, and that facility goes on. Then enter 1828, the man who really changed things there, Edward Long Fox. Dr. Long Fox was a Bristol psychiatrist, Brislington. There are 3 generations of Dr. Long Foxes, father, son, grandson, all associated with Bristol Hospital, all associated with the University of Bristol. And he was way ahead of his time. He had the idea that you needed to treat people with mental disorder in a more holistic way. You didn't just lock them in asylums, throw away the key and forget about Brexit, and he established a lunatic asylum in Brislington, which remained in the family hands as a hospital until 1952. It never joined the NHS. But Dr. Longfox came to Weston because he saw the advantages of Knightstone Island as a place for recuperation. So he took over, and the family owned quarries, granite quarries in Cornwall, which were quite useful because he could then bring his own stone up from Cornwall and build the Great Sea Wall around Knightstone Island. And he built the causeway, which meant you could get to the facilities at any stage of the tide. So Knightstone Causeway is there thanks to Dr. Edward Longfox. And here's a wonderful account. It opened in 1836, this person visiting Weston. Before breakfast, Mr. Lawrence and I walked to the Knightstone Baths, where I had a cold shower for the second time, having commenced a series of 7 baths on the Saturday preceding. Selina had a tepid bath at the same place, at the temperature of 98 degrees, preparatory to bathing in the open sea, which she is to begin to do daily on Wednesday. So again, going into the sea still wasn't quite that. People haven't got that idea of a lot of people are frightened because they thought the sea went down and down and down, forever, and that's where Jonah and the whale. People, the idea of geology and science, and that was all fairly new. But this lovely painting, it's an idyllic, calm water, isn't it? Again, it's in the museum's collection. And for 3 shillings, you could have a hot water salt bath. About £8.60 a day. Well, that's not a great amount if you were to go into a gym bath or whatever. But compare it with what people earned, and that's equivalent to 1/3 of a working man's weekly salary or wage. So just to go in for 1 saltwater bath. It's always the problem. You can go on online and get the value of money today from 200 years ago, but you've got to equate that to what people earned, not what the money, the monetary value is. It's very difficult to compare. But it's a nice little watercolour, isn't it? And that's Claremont Lodge, another bathing establishment around the coast. And Fox spent £20,000. That was a hell of a lot of money. That's about 2.5 million today, creating it. And you can see that print, the upper print showing. This is from Park Place, looking across at his new island. He built Dr. Fox's bathhouse, and that's still there. And he built a hotel and accommodation at the side of it called Arthur's Tower. That isn't there, because when the council acquired the island in 1902, they demolished Arthur's Tower and built a municipal swimming pool and municipal theatre. But Dr. Fox's bathhouse remains, and it's called today Dr. Fox's bathhouse. The later edition, which is the cafe with a glazed roof, that wasn't part of the original. But for a long time, I mean, I can certainly remember when I was younger, it was a sauna and salon. It was a bit sort of run down, but it was still pursuing the idea of medicinal treatment. And he's here. Anyone know why? He's on top of the swimming pool. Because when they were building the facilities on Knightstone Island, they opened up a hole and found a huge human skeleton, about 7 foot tall, which and there was a funeral urn there as well. They immediately thought this was a Roman knight, because they thought the Worldbury Hill was a Roman encampment. So this was the local knight. So this is the Knight Stone. So we have the name Knightstone because this is where the knight, and this is the Roman knight on the top of the roof, the pinnacle of Knightstone Baths. Now, of course, he wasn't Roman. We know, well, they want to know that, but it's more than likely he was Iron Age from the hill. Now, why was he buried there? Why was there a funeral urn as well? It's all been lost. But he would not have been Roman, but he was big. He was probably a local Celtic Iron Age chief. But there we have Knightstone, and there's the old boy on the top, and that's why it's called Knightstone. Now, there were other facilities for taking the benefit of water, and here's this one. Hot and cold plunging and shower baths commodiously fitted up under the superintendence of Mrs. Jane Gill, one of the original bathing women of the place. The shower bath consisted of a man standing on a ladder tipping a bucket of water. But this Turkish bath, the facade is still there. And no end of people go down this little lane, Old Post Office Lane, from High Street to Wadham Street, and they look at this bit of intricate work and say, what on earth was that? It was a Turkish bath. It's still there, but inside, I think it's part of the pub, isn't it? But what's inside it, I'm not sure. But
I'm trying to think where Post Office Lane and Wadham Street is.
up at the Playhouse,
Yeah.
Subway,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the corner there. But it's yes, yeah. But it's crying out for something interesting, isn't it? There, and I mean, beautiful. When you look at it, it's clearly a Turkish bath. It's that sort of feel to it, isn't it? And at the other end, the old stable, and this was the first telephone exchange in Weston, before it moved to where the Sovereign Centre is now, and before it then moved from there to the boulevard. So here's Weston's first. There obviously weren't any telephones in Weston when that opened in 1890. And this is the rest of Wadham Street. This was Dickie Dart's riding stables. This is where you came to get your carriage, get your horse. People used to say, oh, it used to be a fire station. No, it didn't. It's only because it's got red doors. It's never been a fire station. It was the riding stables. And then it became a motor garage place. Those are lovely cars. I wish I had one of those. And again, very helpful. They put the date on. So look up all the time, because at what is now the subway, there's the little lane that goes down Old Post Office Lane. Up there tells you what the building was, the Old Post Office. So clearly when they moved the post office across to the Italian Gardens, somebody had the sense to put a sign up there saying, well, this used to be the post office, so we'll call it the Old Post Office. And then by 1840, we were beginning to see the development of these seafront developments for accommodation of people. So we see the Victoria and Albert buildings appearing along the seafront. Seaward Hotel, still there, but they're two-storey buildings. The basements were never meant to be used because that's where the water sort of came in. So hotels often put their dining rooms down there now, and they moan when the water comes in. And that's the Seaward as it developed, with another story on the top, and as it is today. But just at this end was the last of the original Regency style properties. It hasn't gone up a story, hasn't come out a story, still has its front garden. So that's what the entire two terraces would have looked like. Beautifully elegant Regency, almost Sidmouth to look at. And it's still a house. It's not a hotel. So the railway, right? Okay, let's get really modern. We chug away for the last 10 minutes. And Great Western Railway, so Turner's wonderful painting. It comes into Bristol from the Temple Meadow, from the Paddington Fields to the Temple Meadow. 1840 it arrives, and look at what happens to the population. I put the three villages of Uphill, Worl and Weston. You can see how Weston lags behind Uphill and Worl. But then something happens in 1821. Weston suddenly is becoming much more important. Within 10 years, 1831, its population doubles. Then in 1841, it doubles yet again. And this is all before the railway arrives. Then, from 1841 onwards, the town just explodes. I mean, we think now about the rapid development out towards the motorway. In proportion, it's nothing compared with what was going on during Victorian days.
So did they foresee the railway coming to Weston?
I'll tell you. Yeah. So the railway arrives in. The railway actually comes to Weston in 1841. So Brunel gets it to Bristol in 1840. A year later, he becomes engineer to the Bristol and Exeter Company, brings it to Weston, and I think Weston's probably the first seaside resort to be put onto the line. I've checked with the other resorts, so we're ahead of the game. Two major engineers, Brunel to start with, and Fox, not to be confused with the other Dr. Fox. This is Francis Fox, the engineer, but Brunel is the person who built our railway. Why have I put this in? Well, because it's revolutionary. When the railway arrives, you can bring building stone. So for the first time, we can start to build with Bath stone. We had to wait till the railway arrived before that could be transported here. And when the railway came, this is what Brunel wanted to do. This is where he wanted his railway to come along roughly Locking Road, onto the seafront, turn left, right down what is now the beach lawns, simple bridge over the River Axe and on down to Bridgewater. So Weston today would be rather like Dawlish, if you'd had his way. Weston people wanted the railway, they wanted the benefit of the railway, but they didn't want it coming through their nice up-and-coming little genteel town because it would frighten the horses. And so they made him build it further out on the moor, which meant that Weston then did not have a railway station. So the only solution to that was to put a branch line in. From this main line, a little branch line came up into Weston, which was very inconvenient because you had to get off at what became known as Weston Moor Station onto this funny little horse-drawn railway to start with, into Weston-super-Mare. And this is Weston's first station, drawn by W.R. Crotch, whoever he was, but it's all we've got. Now look very carefully, because this is a Brunel station. It doesn't exist now. You can see the hay on the wagon there. You can see a building behind it with the word railway on it. Look carefully, because there it is. Go back. See it? There. So where the old floral clock is, that's where the first railway station was. And this was the railway hotel. And this again, a very naive sketch, it's all we've got. This would be looking from roughly the Odeon at the station. This would be Alexandra Parade. These are the little carriages. Look, there are two horses there to pull it. And then we had a steam engine. That was our Weston steam engine, which went up and down the line from the Moor station into Weston. And this is an exact model replica of one of the engines on the line, the Lone Star, which is where that railway station was. And if we look on a satellite photograph of Alexandra Parade is the most ridiculous shaped traffic island. No highway engineers designed it. It's there because it was something else. So look at that. That's what it was. The railway line was there. And when that railway line closed, they simply put earth over it, planted some grass, a few trees, and it became Alexandra Parade. And the weighbridge is still there, just opposite Tesco. Look at it, but look very carefully at the roof, and you can see the words there, the old weighbridge. And then the land was put up for sale in 1867 because they were going to build a new station just across the road. There was a lot of horse-drawn traffic. Weston was growing, and the level crossing was just pointless. So they shifted just a few yards to the south to where the Odeon now stands, meaning this land was up for sale. And Bristol and Exeter Railway Company produced this map selling 3 lots. They were never sold, and the council acquired it and didn't develop it. So that's the Alexandra Parade Gardens today. So the 1841 railway station is there. it shifts to there, 1866, as the bottom 6 has shifted as well. And this is what it was like on the old Ordnance Survey map. Locking Road here, the railway station there. Today, that's the Odeon. Odeon built 1937. And that is the view from the town hall. Get rid of that cinema there is the original cinema in Weston, the electric. That is where the Odeon now stands. So all of this, of course, has gone. And here we have the original signal box still there, now looking very forlorn. It is, we've established, it is the oldest signal box left in the country. The oldest. It's a listed building now. If it's the oldest signal box left in England, I have said, and nobody's able to challenge me, well, it must therefore be the oldest signal box in the world, because we were the first country to bring railways into use. So we probably have the world's oldest signal box, invented by John Saxby, and there it is. Network Rail, what are they doing with it? Precious little. But Brunel was forced now to push his railway line where he didn't want to, through a hill at Old Nixon. And so he had to get Irish navvies to cut and blast their way through the hill, and he built his wonderful elliptical span brick bridge. I think it's the highest one in England, could be in the world as well, but certainly the highest in England. And he linked the road, because he had to cut the road, by building that. It's a wonderful, wonderful structure, called Devil's Bridge, after the man who wouldn't sell him the land, Mr. Payne. He named the bridge after him, but there's another story of that, but I haven't got time to go through that now. And Brunel built his other single span elliptical brick bridge, which is wider, only just, at Maidenhead, another listed structure. But of course his railway here was broad gauge, and the rest of the country was going on to standard gauge, so in the end we had to change as well. And so the broad gauge carriages are twice as wide as today's carriages, really luxurious things. So it all changed, first into mixed gauge, and you can see this mixed gauge here, broad gauge plus standard. This is the last broad gauge train in England. It's coming from Paddington to Penzance, past Uphill Junction, there.
Well, on the paper last week.
Yes, I wrote it, yes,
Ah.
yeah. And that's it today. And that's the, well, oh yes, sorry, in 1884 the loop line was built. Sorry, I didn't mention that. And this is the loop line at Whirl. Again, the station there no longer exists. But here's the interesting thing. The last steam broad gauge train, 20th of May 1892, by the following Monday, the entire Great Western network had changed. They spent a weekend converting the entire system from Paddington to Penzance, from broad gauge to standard gauge, in one weekend. An incredible job. And in Weston, 1884, the new loop line is built. This is Weston's new station, very busy station, lots of people working there. It brings in all the day traffic into Locking Road, special excursion platforms there, all of which of course came down when the railway network changed in the 60s, and that's now Tesco's.
I remember playing on that when I was a kid. Showing my age now.
You all remember. And this is the view from the Drove Road Bridge, looking to Tesco. That is now car park, coach park. First promenade in Weston, 1826, as I said. And then we conclude with this. This is the cut-off point for the talk. This is when everything changed. 13th of May, 1842, Weston becomes a town, and the man running it is no longer the lord of the manor. It's Francis Hutchinson Synge, the first chairman of the new, they weren't called councillors then, new town commissioners. And the picture you can see has been intentionally painted like that. He is holding the document, This is the ordinary people now who are running the town, looking out across the Squire's land, but we are in charge. And at the same time, we get a newspaper, the first newspaper in Weston, 1st of April, 1843, and there it is, the very first Western Mercury. Price tuppence, which was a hell of a lot of money then, about £10 today. And there we are. Right, yes.
Thank you.
So that's, God, timed that perfectly.